The king of Verrin told me to sit down, in the voice he has never once had to repeat, in a room with his oldest friends in it, and the fire going. And I said no. I want to be clear that this was not courage. Courage is when you have something left to lose. I had already lost all of it once. In a life nobody in that room remembered except me, and I knew down to the last inch what my obedience had been worth. So I picked up my book and told him I was going to bed. The room went quiet, and it was the particular silence of people who have no script for what has just happened. Somebody set a glass down and forgot to let go of it. Anton laughed once and then stopped, because Nikolai was not laughing, and his scent had come across the room like a window opening onto snow. I had almost reached the door when he said the one thing I had not prepared for. Before we dive in, let me know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Now, back to the story. I died on the back stairs of the East Wing with an armful of somebody else's coats. There was a party going on above me. I could hear it through the ceiling, that flattened underwater sound a party makes when you are one floor below it. All bass and heels and laughter with the words filed off. Her furs had been left in the wrong cloakroom, which was not my job. But I was the one who noticed, and I was always the one who noticed. I took the service stairs because they were faster. The third step from the top had been loose for years, and everybody who used those stairs knew about it. And I knew about it too. And I was hurrying, and my hands were full. I remember the cold of the stone against my cheek and thinking, in a very calm and practical voice, that I should get up. I did not get up. What surprised me, lying there, was that I did not think about him. Not at first. I thought about the coats, which had gone everywhere, and I worried about them. And then I heard myself worrying about them, and something turned over in my chest. I was 31 years old. I had spent my entire adult life inside that building. I had learned which of his moods meant leave, and which meant stay. I had learned how he took his coffee, which nobody else in the kingdom knew, because he did not tell people things like that. He simply drank it wrong for years until I fixed it, and then went on drinking it without ever asking why it had changed. I had stood at the back of a cathedral and watched him bond a woman with a good name and a better bloodline. And I had gone home afterward and sat on the edge of my bed with my shoes still on until it got light. And I had never once been asked a question about myself. Not one. Not in all those years. He had known me since I was 9 years old and he was 16, and I could not have named a single thing he understood about me. Lying on that stone with the noise of his life going on over my head, I got angry for the first time in my life. Properly angry. Not the small resentment you swallow with a smile, but the enormous kind that arrives too late to be useful. What was I doing, I thought? All that. For him. The stairwell light was on a timer. It went out. I remember being embarrassed that they would find me like this, with her furs under me. And I remember thinking that somebody would eventually come down looking for a bottle of something, and that this was the closest thing to being missed I had ever managed. Then, nothing. Then the smell of hot bread and cut grass through an open window, and someone shouting in the courtyard about a car. I opened my eyes in a bed I had not slept in for years, in the room I had at 24, with the summer light coming through the tall window at the angle it only comes through in the second week of that month. My hands were on the blanket in front of me. They were not the hands I had died with. There was no white scar across the knuckle where I had put my hand through a glass door at a bad party. My wrist was thin, my mouth tasted of nothing, and my back did not hurt, and the noise in the courtyard was the circle coming back for the summer. I lay there for a long time. You would think a person would leap up. I could not move. I went through it slowly and horribly, prodding at each detail like a sore tooth, and every single thing I checked was correct. The crack in the plaster over the wardrobe that I had watched them fix. The blue jug on the sill with my mother's name scratched into the base. The sound of Anton's voice in the courtyard, younger, doing an impression of somebody and getting a laugh. And under everything, coming up the stairwell and along the corridor and under my door, that scent, frost, and the incense they used in the old chapel, and somewhere underneath it a thin thread of saffron that I had spent my whole life trying to get closer to. He was home. My body did what it had always done. It leaned toward the door. That is the truth, and I am not going to pretend otherwise, because it would make me sound stronger than I am. Some part of me that lives below thinking got up before I did, went toward that scent, and started making a list of what he would need after a drive like that. And then I remembered the stairs. I sat on the edge of the bed with my feet on the cold floor, and I made myself say it out loud, quietly, in an empty room, because I did not trust myself to remember it once he was actually in front of me. He never asked you one question. My voice sounded very young. That frightened me more than anything else that morning. Then I got up and took my suppressant, because I had taken one every morning since I was 17, and so had every other Omega in that building. And because there are things you go on doing even after you have died once, the bottle was full. That was the part that got me. In the life I had come out of it had been down to the last few, and I had been putting off the walk to the dispensary for a week. And here it was on the shelf, full, waiting for a man who had 7 years left. There is a rule at court that nobody writes down and everybody follows. When the king is in a corridor, you face the wall. You do not look at him, you do not speak. You flatten yourself against the stone and you wait. And afterward, you go about your day. Servants do it because they are told. The rest of us do it because our parents did it, and because there is a pleasure in it. In being the sort of person who knows the correct thing to do. I had done it perfectly my whole life. I went down the west corridor that afternoon with a book under my arm, and I heard them coming. 5 or 6 of them. That particular loose noise the circle made when they had been in a car together too long. Everyone ahead of me turned and faced the stone. A girl carrying linen put her forehead almost against the wall. I kept walking. I want to say I planned it. I did not plan it. My feet simply went on doing what feet do, and by the time I understood that I was not stopping, they were on top of me, and I looked up into the face of a man I had watched go gray at the temples and marry somebody else. And he was 31, and unmarked, and looking back at me with the mild irritation of somebody whose path is blocked. "Move," Nikolai said. 7 years of my life came up my throat at once. "You move," I said. "There's a whole corridor. Use some of it." The silence that came after that went on far too long. Anton actually took a step back, like a man at a table where a glass has gone over. Casper, who I had forgotten was even alive in this part of the story, made a small noise that might have been the beginning of a laugh and turned it into a cough. Nikolai did not move. He looked at me the way you look at a word you are certain you have spelled wrong. "What did you say?" "You heard me." I heard a sound. His voice was flat and pleasant, which was worse than shouting, and his scent had not shifted at all, which meant nothing had reached him yet. "Say it again." And here is where I discovered something about myself that I had needed 7 years and 1 flight of stairs to learn. I was not afraid of him. I had been afraid of losing him, every day, for my whole life, but I had already lost him, in the only way that counts. And there is nothing left to threaten in a man who has already been through the worst version of the story. "I said you can go around," I told him. "I'm reading." Then I stepped past him, and my shoulder brushed his sleeve, and I felt the whole length of my arm light up like a struck match. And I kept walking anyway, all the way to the end of that corridor, and around the corner, and up 2 flights, where I sat down on a windowsill and shook for the better part of an hour. That was the first day. By the 3rd day, he had begun to be strange about it. I noticed because I had been reading him since I was a boy. That was my one skill, honed to a horrible edge, and it turns out that a skill built for making somebody comfortable works just as well for watching him come apart. Nikolai in a room he owns is a man who does not turn his head. Everything is brought to him. He looks at whoever is speaking to him with an expression of polite boredom, and when he is finished with them, he stops looking, and they go away. On the 3rd day, I came into the small drawing room where they all were, took a chair by the window, and did not greet him. He turned his head. It was nothing. It was less than nothing. A man looked at a door, but I had watched that door for years, and I knew he did not do that, and I sat in my chair with my book at the wrong angle and my ears full of my own pulse. Anton was in the middle of a story about a girl from the lake. Casper was on the floor with his back against the sofa, the good-natured one, the one who filled in whatever hole the mood had in it. And Nikolai, who had not asked me a question in all the years he had known me, said to the room in general, without looking anywhere near me, "Somebody has been teaching the boy to talk. I'm 24, I said. That is not a defense. It wasn't a defense. It was a correction. Casper laughed out loud that time and did not bother hiding it. Anton did not laugh. Anton had a face that never quite finished any expression it started. And he was watching me now with real attention. The kind you get from a dog when you move a bowl. He was funnier when he was quiet, Anton said. He was not there when he was quiet, Nikolai said, and turned a page of the paper he was not reading. And that was the end of it. I sat by that window with my heart going like a bird in a box, and I told myself, very clearly, that this meant nothing. He had noticed a piece of furniture had moved. That is all novelty is. It wears off, and then you are exactly where you were, except that now you have been foolish in public. I wanted on the record that I was right about that, and also completely wrong, and that both of those things nearly ruined me. It did not wear off. What happened instead was that the king of Verrin, who had never in his life gone anywhere he was not already expected, began turning up. He turned up in the long gallery, where nobody goes, at the hour I read there. He turned up at the stables when I was not riding. He came into the breakfast room at an hour he had never once been awake for, sat down at the far end with a coffee he did not drink, and read a document I am fairly sure was a shipping schedule, and stayed until I left. He never spoke to me first. That was the part that told me something was actually wrong with him. A man who wants your attention asks for it. Nikolai simply arranged to be in the same air as me and then behaved as though we had both been assigned there. You are in my chair, I said, the fourth or fifth time. He looked at the chair. It has no name on it. It has a dent in it that fits me. Then sit in it. You're in it. I am aware. He turned a page. Sit somewhere else. Or stand there and tell me about the dent, if that is where this is going. I sat on the arm of the sofa opposite and read for the better part of an hour with my heart making a fool of itself and my eyes going over the same paragraph until the words came apart. He did not look at me once. He also did not turn a single page in all that time. And when he finally got up and left, he said, at the door, without turning round, the dent is a flaw in the frame. Have it repaired. I like the flaw. Yes, he said. I noticed, and he was gone, and I sat there with that word going round my skull like a coin in a tin. Here is what I need you to understand, because otherwise the rest of this makes no sense. Nikolai was not a good man at that point in his life. I am not going to soften it for him. He was rude in a way that cost him nothing, which is the worst kind. And he had been rude so consistently and for so long that nobody around him could tell anymore whether it was character or whether he interrupted people. He left rooms while they were still talking. He asked a man at his own table what the point of him was, and then went back to his soup. But he did not lie. Not ever. Not even socially. Not even to make an evening easier. If your poem was bad, he told you it was bad, and then, if you asked, he told you exactly which line had lost him and why, and he was always right. If a servant broke something, nothing happened, because he genuinely did not care about objects. If a minister was incompetent, everything happened. And it happened in the open. He was the only person in that palace whose face I did not have to interpret, and I had been interpreting faces my whole life. And he was funny. He was very funny. In that dry way that only works if the person is actually paying attention to everything in the room, which he was. Which is the thing that took me 2 lifetimes to understand. He noticed all of it. He simply had never once used what he noticed on somebody's behalf. The trouble was that people had been trying to get hold of him since he was 15. I did not know the details then. I only knew the shape of it. Like knowing a house has a cellar without ever having been down there. Families steering their sons into his eyeline. Girls with instructions. That awful season when he was 18 and there was a list, an actual printed list, and I watched a boy at the lake work on him for a whole summer with a patience that even then made my skin crawl. If everybody who has ever been kind to you wanted something, then kindness stops being information. Rudeness, though, is a good filter. Say something cutting and see who is still smiling at you afterward, because the ones with an angle always are. I had been smiling at him since I was a child. The night it turned into something else. We were all in the yellow room after a dinner nobody wanted to be at. Anton had opened a second bottle. Casper was trying to get a fire started with wet wood and refusing help. And Nikolai was in the deep chair by the window with his collar open and his sleeves pushed up, which was what he did instead of admitting he was tired. I got up to go. "Sit down," he said. "No. No." Anton laughed once and stopped. Somebody set a glass down and forgot to let go of it. His scent came across the room like a window opening onto snow, and everything in me leaned toward it, and I stood where I was. The room made that noise again. It had started to be a habit by then, and I had begun to understand that I was doing something to the atmosphere in every room I stood in, and that I could not stop. "It was not a request," Nikolai said mildly. "It was a sentence with no please in it, which is what you say instead of asking, because if you asked I might say no, and then you'd have to hear it." I picked my book up off the table. "I'm going to bed. Good night." I had almost reached the door. Jonas. Nobody used my name in that room. I had been in that circle since I was a child, and I had been the boy. The quiet one of Anton's several nicknames. A hand attached to a drink. I stopped with my back to him and I felt every hair on my arms go up. "Why?" he said. "Why what? You have been in my house your entire life. You were the most agreeable person I have ever met. I would have said you did not have a temperature." A pause. "And this summer you speak to me as though I owe you money." Behind him, Anton was watching us with the top of his glass against his mouth. "Maybe I grew up," I said. "People do not grow up in a fortnight. You'd have to have been looking at me before the fortnight to know that." The fire cracked. Casper had got it going after all and was on his knees in front of it, motionless, pretending to be somewhere else. Nikolai stood up. "I have to be honest about what happened in my body when he did that, because if I lie about it here, you will not believe the rest." Every single thing in me went toward him. A whole life of grief and one flight of stairs had not changed my animal at all. He was the shape my life had been built around since I was 9 years old. And when he stood, my knees knew about it first. He stopped an arm's length away. His scent was all over me by then, cold and clean with that thread of something warm buried in it. And mine had gone up in front of everybody. Gooseberry and wet rosemary, sharp and green and entirely out of my control. "You want an apology?" he said. He sounded genuinely curious. "For what?" "I don't want anything from you. Everyone wants something from me." "Yes," I said. "I know. That's why you're like this. I did not plan that either. It came out of me flat and tired, and I watched it land somewhere behind his eyes. And for a second the whole arrangement of his face came loose. Then he said, "Go to bed, Jonas," in a voice I had never heard him use. And I went, and I did not sleep. He found me the next morning on the landing outside my own door. He was in shirt sleeves with a coat over his arm and no reason on earth to be in the residential wing at that hour. His rooms are 2 floors above mine and at the far end of the building, and I had spent years being privately sour about the distance, and it had become, overnight, the only thing standing between me and a serious problem. "You are avoiding me," he said. "I live here. You're the one standing outside my door at dawn like a milkman. Do you know what a milkman is?" "I know what one is. I have read a book." Something happened at the corner of his mouth. He put his hand flat on the door frame above my head, which brought him near enough that I had to look up, and near enough that the frost in his scent went right through the middle of me, and the saffron underneath came up warm. "Say the thing you said last night again," he said, slowly. "No." "Why not?" "Because you want it. And when you want something, you take it apart to see how it works, and then it doesn't work anymore, and you go and stand somewhere else." My voice was not doing what I wanted. "I'm not a mechanism." He was quiet for a moment. His hand did not move off the frame. I could feel the warmth coming off the inside of his forearm near my ear, and I thought, with the clarity of a man watching his own house burn, that if he touched my neck I would have absolutely nothing left. "What happened to you?" he said. It was so close to a question about me that my eyes stung. "Nothing happened to me." "You are lying. You do not lie. That was the entire point of you." "That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me," I said, "and it's about how useful I was." He took his hand off the door. I went inside and shut it and stood with my forehead against the wood and listened to him not walk away. He stood out there for a while. Then he did leave. And the corridor took his scent with it very slowly, and I slid down and sat on my own floor like an idiot. Casper caught up with me at the stables later that week. Casper is the one you would pick if you were sensible. He is an alpha. He is easy. He has a laugh that makes horses calm down. And he had liked me since we were boys in a way that had nothing to do with anybody else being in the room. He took the bridle out of my hands and did the buckle I had been failing at for the past few minutes. "You've gone dangerous," he said. "I've gone rude. On you, those are the same." He handed the bridle back. "Do you know," he asked me, "what you were like?" Everything in me stopped. "When?" "Wednesday. Middle of a briefing about the border road. And he says, without any warning at all, 'What is Jonas actually like?'" Casper shook his head, admiring. "I have known that man since he was 12. He has never asked me what anybody is like. He asks what people want." Different question. "What did you say?" "I said you were the kindest person in the palace, and that you had been in love with him since you were about 11, and that everyone knew it except him." Casper let that sit for exactly as long as it took my face to fall off, then grinned. "I said you were quiet and that you notice things. Breathe." I breathed. "Jonas." He had stopped grinning. "Whatever this is, be careful. He is not cruel, but he has never had to think about what a person costs, because nothing has ever cost him anything, and you are made of glass in this particular area. And I have watched you carry his coat in the rain." "That was a long time ago," I said. Which was true in a way I could not explain to anybody. Anton was less kind about it, and Anton mattered more than he should have, because Anton was the one who decided what the circle laughed at. He had been at Nikolai's elbow since childhood and had built an entire personality out of the position. He had also, in the life nobody remembered, been the man who told me, gently, at the reception, that it was better this way, and then asked me to see about the cars. He waited until we were all in the courtyard on a bright morning, packing for the lake, with the drivers and half the household standing around. "You'll want to put the boy in the second car," he said to Casper, loud enough. "He gets sick. He always has. He was sick in the Queen's car when he was 11 and cried about it for a week." It was true. That was the trick of Anton. He never said anything untrue. "And bring him something to carry," Anton said, "or he doesn't know where to put his hands." Everybody laughed, not cruelly. "That is the thing about a circle. That is exactly the thing." They laughed with affection. The laugh you give a dog that is bad at stairs, and it goes into you like a nail all the same. I stood there in the sun with my bag at my feet and heard the sound of all those years of it, and Nikolai, who had one foot in the first car and had not been listening, laughed too. The lake house is low and white and full of other people's furniture, and the circle had been going there every summer since before any of us could drive. There is a boathouse, a long table under a vine that never fruits, and a stretch of shallow water where the bottom is stones. I had been happy there once. That is the worst part of going back to a place with a whole life in your head. Every room had a version of me in it, younger, holding something for somebody, glad to be included. The first evening went well enough. Casper cooked badly and loudly. Somebody swam. Nikolai sat at the end of the table with his sleeves rolled and did not join in and did not leave. And twice I looked up and found that he had been looking at me and had not bothered to stop when I caught him. The second night, Anton started a game. It was an old one. You go round the table and each person has to say the thing they would change about the man on their left, and everybody drinks, and it is only funny if you do it fast. It is the sort of game that lets you say a true thing with a laugh on the end, so that anybody who flinches has lost. It came round to me, and Anton had my name in his mouth before it got there. "Jonas," he said, "I would give you something to want. I want things. Name one." He was smiling. He had waited a long time for this, and I could see the waiting on him. "Go on. Name one thing you have ever wanted that was yours and not his." The table had gone still in a way that was not the good stillness. "You learned his coffee," Anton said. "Do not look at me like that. Everybody knows about the coffee. You know which shirts he hates. You know what he does when he cannot sleep." He raised his glass to me, pleasantly. "And he has never asked you one question in his life. And you keep coming back. It is the most loyal thing at this table. Change it." That is my answer. I have been laughed at before. That was not it. Nobody laughed. That was so much worse. I sat there under that vine with my face doing something I could not control, and I watched every single person at that table understand at the same moment that it was true, and that they had all known it was true for years, and that they had been letting it happen like weather. And then I did the thing that saved my life. I put my glass down and I said, "You're right." Anton's smile stalled. I did learn his coffee. My voice came out wrong and I did not try to fix it. Nobody made me do that. I wanted to. I stood in the rain with his coat once, and I would have done it again the next night if it had rained. Somebody at the far end of the table was very carefully not moving. "It isn't the part you think it is," I said. "The bad part. It isn't the coat." I had to stop. I could hear how thin I sounded, and I kept going anyway. I never asked him for anything. Not once. In all that time, and you think that's because I'm loyal, and it isn't. It's because I was frightened of what he'd say. So I just kept, I don't know, being useful. Instead, nobody moved. "Anyway," I said, "you can have the coffee." Then I got up and walked down to the water, and I got as far as the boathouse before my legs stopped working properly and I had to sit down on the wet boards with my hands over my face. I do not know how long he stood behind me before I heard him. "How long has he been doing that?" Nikolai said. I did not turn round. "Which part?" "That. To you. At my table. Since we were about 12. I wiped my face with my wrist and did not care that he could see it. "You laughed in the courtyard, by the way. When he did the thing about the car and the sickness, you laughed." The silence behind me was very long. "I was not listening," he said. "I know. That's the whole thing. That's the entire thing, Nikolai. It's not that you're cruel. It's that the room is arranged around you and you have never once looked at the arrangement, and everybody in it learns very fast what you find amusing. And then they do it to whoever is smallest, and you laugh because you were not listening." I got up. My hands were filthy from the boards. "You built that table. You don't have to have said a word." He was standing in the dark with his shirt open at the collar and his hair a mess from the water, and I have never seen a person look so completely stripped of a language. "Sit down," he said, and then, immediately, "No, that is not. I am asking you to stay there for a moment. Please." The please went through me like a nail. "I do not know how to do this," he said. "Do what?" "This." He gestured at the boathouse, the lake, me, all of it, with a hand that was not entirely under his control. "You are upset and I want to fix it, and every instrument I have is the wrong size." I laughed. It came out wet and horrible. That's the first true thing anybody's said to me all summer. "Mine Mal. Mine. Mine. Mine." "I have never said anything else," he said. And that was true. And we both stood there with it. He did not touch me. He stayed exactly where he was, at a distance, and I understood with a small shock that he was doing it deliberately, that a man who had spent his life taking up whatever space he wanted was standing there measuring it out. "Go up," I said. "They'll be wondering. Let them." "Nikolai." "I do not want to go up," he said. "I want to know what you meant when you said half your life." The wind came off the water and I could smell the whole of him, and I wanted, with my entire body, to walk the boards between us and put my face in his neck, and I made myself stand still on those boards until the wanting went from a fire to a stone I could carry. "Ask me again when it's not the same night," I said. He was gone from the lake house by morning. So was Anton. I found out from Casper, who told it badly and with enormous enjoyment, standing in the kitchen at an hour when everybody else was asleep. There had been no scene. Nikolai had gone up to the house, woken his private secretary, and by the time anyone came down for breakfast, Anton had been removed from every position he held. His family's business with the crown had been suspended pending review, and there was a car waiting on the gravel with his bags already in it. He did not even shout, Casper said, delighted and slightly appalled. He said, "You are not funny, and you have been eating at my table for 20 years, and then he went to bed. I should have felt something clean about it. What I felt was cold. I found Nikolai days later in the old chapel corridor, which is the only place in that palace where you can be sure of not being interrupted, because it smells of damp, and nobody has any business there. "You had him thrown out," I said. "Yes. Did you ask me if I wanted that?" He turned and looked at me with genuine incomprehension. And to be fair to him, he was not being arrogant. He looked at me like a man who has been handed a word in a language he does not speak. "He humiliated you," he said. "In front of my house. He did. And now every person at that table knows the king emptied a man's entire life over something that happened to me at a party, and half of them think I asked for it, and all of them are now extremely careful around me, which means I have gone from being the joke to being the thing you are not allowed to touch. And I am no closer to being a person." I was shaking again. "I have never talked to anyone like that in either life. You didn't help me. You collected me. You wanted him to go on. I wanted you to say something at the table." He went absolutely still. "That's all," I said. One sentence, at the time, in front of them, while it was happening. That's what a friend does. Instead, you waited until nobody was watching and used the whole weight of the crown, because that costs you nothing. And a sentence at that table would have cost you something. "What would it have cost me?" he said, quietly, really asking. "It would have shown them you cared what happened to me." And there it was. I watched it arrive. Whatever was under all of that came up into his face for half a second, and then closed over, and he turned away toward the window and stood there with his back to me. And he said, in a completely different voice, "No. No what? You are asking me to make you visible. I'm asking you to be honest in public. You're honest about everything else." "I am honest about opinions," he said, "not about people." He would not say another word after that. He walked out of the chapel corridor and left me standing in the damp, and I did not understand what I had touched until the storm. It broke over the palace on the last night of that month, one of those enormous inland storms that goes on for hours and takes out the lights in the older wings. I was on the stairs with a candle like somebody in a bad painting, when the corridor door opened, and he came through it, soaked to the skin, in a dress shirt, having walked the length of the outer courtyard in it from a state dinner he had evidently abandoned. We looked at each other. "Your hair is wet," I said, which is the single stupidest sentence I have ever produced. "It is raining," he said, extensively. And then neither of us said anything, and the candle was doing very little, and he was near enough that I could see the water running off his chin, and his scent had come apart in the wet. That is the thing nobody tells you. Rain takes an alpha's scent to pieces and lays it out flat. All the cold, formal top of him was gone, and what was left was saffron, warm and close and completely undefended. And my knees actually went. "Jonas, don't. You are the one holding the candle up," he said. "You brought it to my face." I had. I lowered it, and that made it worse, because now we were mostly in the dark, with the storm going off outside, and I could hear him breathing, and something in my scent broke open, the sweetness that only comes up when my guard is down. Hyacinth cut green off the stem, and I heard him make a sound. "There it is," he said, almost to himself. "There you are. You should go and change. Tell me to go." "Go." "You did not mean it," he said. "So I am staying." And he took the candle out of my hand and set it down on the stair, and then his hands were on either side of my face, and mine were in his wet shirt, and I could not have told you which of us moved first, and it does not matter, because we have never once agreed about it since. He kissed me like somebody who had run out of other options. I had spent half my life imagining it, and I had got it completely wrong. I had imagined being taken. What actually happened was that the king of Verrin held my jaw in both hands as though the whole thing might be removed from him at any second, and made a low, broken noise against my mouth when I kissed him back, and pushed me into the stone with the water off his shirt going straight through mine, and said my name twice against my throat like a man checking that a bridge would hold. My hands got under the wet linen. His skin was hot from the cold. His mouth went from my mouth to my jaw to the place under my ear where a person cannot pretend anything, and I heard myself say something I have never repeated to another living soul. Then he stopped. He put his forehead against the wall beside my head, breathing like he had run there, and he said, "I cannot." I could not speak. Not in a corridor. Not with you. His hand was still open against my ribs. "Not until you know what you are doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing." "No," he said. "You do not, because you do not know what I am." And he picked up the candle and put it back in my hand and folded my fingers around it, and went, and left me flattened against that stone with my whole life on fire. He avoided me for 4 days. I know it was 4, because I counted, and then I got angry at myself for counting, and then I counted anyway. On the 5th he sent for me, which I resented, and then he came to get me himself when I did not go, which was better. He took me up to the roof of the North Tower. There is a lead walkway up there and a view of the whole city going down the hill toward the river, and the wind is bad enough that nobody can hear you from any window. He had brought a bottle and 2 glasses, and neither of us touched them. "You said I do not know what you are," I said. "Say it then. I have had 4 days of not sleeping. Sit down." "No, Jonas. I am asking. I have been standing since this morning." He sat on the lead himself, in a suit, with his back against the parapet, and I sat because he had told me the truth about something small, and he had never done that either. He did not look at me while he said it. He looked out at the city. "When I was 15 there was a boy," he said, and then did not say anything else for a while. "His family were nothing. He was in the kitchens at the summer house. That is where I met him. He was funny, and he did not seem to know who I was. For a month, which I understand now was work." He turned the glass by the stem without lifting it. "It went on. 2 years. I told him things I have not told anybody. I was 15. There was a good deal to tell. What happened? His mother had an arrangement with a man on the household council. There were letters. He was paid, and quite well. And the letters were sold twice, once to a newspaper and once to my father, and my father paid more." He said all this in the voice you would use to read out a train timetable, which is how I knew. My father did not tell me. He simply had the boy removed, and I found out 3 years later from a document. The wind came up over the parapet. "So," Nikolai said, "I learned. Anyone who is kind to me wants a thing. That is not bitterness. It is a fact of the position. And the second thing I learned took longer. Do you know what happened to that boy, in the end? No. Neither do I. Nobody does. He was 15 years old and he was removed, and I could not find him at 18 and I could not find him at 25, and I have the resources of a state." Now he looked at me. "That is what happens to somebody I show a preference for. The moment this house knows a person is mine, they become a place to put a lever." I sat on that cold lead with my arms around my knees, and I felt the ground of my entire life shift about a foot to the left. "So you're not cold," I said. "You're careful." "I am cold," he said. "Do not decorate me. I am rude because it is faster, and because it works, and I have enjoyed it, and I have hurt people with it and not looked back. But I do not show a preference. Not for anyone, not once since I was 17 years old. And me?" He was quiet for a long moment. "You are the 4th of Anton's jokes I have laughed at," he said. "There is a book in the long gallery about the migration of birds, and you have taken it out so many times that the spine is broken in 3 places, and you always put it back crooked because you are checking that nobody has moved. You do not drink. You pretend to, at dinners, and you tip it into the plant behind you at the 2nd course, and you have done that since you were 19. When your father died you were 9, and you sat under the piano in the yellow room for 2 days, and I sat on the piano stool and did not say anything because I did not have any words yet, and you have never once mentioned it to me, and neither have I." He set the glass down. "You put your left hand flat on a table before you say something that frightens you. You did it at the lake. You did it on the stairs in the storm. You are doing it now." I looked down at my hand. "I know what you are like, Jonas," he said. "I have always known what you are like. I have known since I was 16 years old and you were a small, furious child who would not eat anything green." I could not breathe properly. "Then why?" I said. My voice came out of somewhere underneath me. "Why did you never say one word?" "Because I am not an idiot," he said, and there was something raw, under it, that had not been there before. "Because the day this court finds out what I like, they will price it. So you just watched." "Yes. Since I was 11 years old. Yes." I got up. I remember the whole city going sideways in front of me. "Do you have any idea what that did to me, Jonas?" "No. You don't get to say my name in that voice." I was standing over him and he did not get up. He sat there and took it with his hands loose on his knees. I thought there was something wrong with me. Not something I'd done. Something I was. I thought I was a person who could stand next to somebody for a decade and simply not register, like a coat rack. And I built my entire idea of what I'm worth on that, and I would have gone on building it for the rest of my life. My voice broke in the middle and I did not stop. You watched me learn how to be invisible so I could stay near you, and you thought that was protecting me? He put his hand over his mouth. Then he took it away and said, "Yes, I did think that." Well, it wasn't. "No," he said. "I see that now." And then he said the thing that undid me completely, in a voice with nothing left on it. "I did not know you could be lost while you were still in the building." I sat back down on the lead because I could not do anything else. We stayed up there until the lights came on across the river, and neither of us said very much. At some point his hand came and lay palm up on the lead between us, and I put mine in it, and he closed his fingers slowly, one at a time, as if he had to think about each one. "I am going to be very bad at this," he said. "I know. You will have to tell me, out loud, every time." He was staring straight ahead. "I will not be able to see it. I've noticed. Do not be funny. I am attempting to be sincere, and it is physically unpleasant." I laughed and he turned his head and looked at me laughing, and whatever was on his face then, I have spent the rest of my life trying to get it back. What followed was the strangest stretch of either of my lives, because I got everything I had ever wanted, and I had to learn how to hold it without going straight back to being the boy in the rain with the coat. He was terrible at it. That is not modesty on his behalf. He was genuinely terrible. He asked me questions like a customs officer, one after another with no space in between, until I told him people are allowed to answer, and then he overcorrected and sat in silence waiting for me to fill it. He gave me a horse. I did not want a horse. He rearranged an entire state visit around a concert I had mentioned liking once, then did not tell me he had done it. So I found out from the chamberlain and had to explain to him at length why that was worse. But he learned. He learned faster than any person I have ever met, because he had been watching all along and only lacked permission to use it. He began to say things at tables, small things, in front of people, in that flat voice. Somebody made a comment about the provinces and my accent, and he said, without looking up, "He has the older pronunciation. You have the fashionable one. One of you is standing in a house built by the other." That was all. It went round the palace in a day. He held a door for me in front of the household council and did not comment on it. He came and found me in the long gallery and read at the other end of the bench with his shoes off. And once, at the end of a bad week, he lay down with his head in my lap and put my hand on his hair himself and said, "Do that," and fell asleep like something shot. And the scent came. That is the part I cannot describe properly, and I have tried. It does not happen at once. You spend enough hours close to a person and their scent starts to arrange itself around yours. And one morning I came down into a room where he had been an hour before, and I could smell what the two of us made together, which is not his and not mine and not a mixture. It is a city in the first hour of heavy snow, when the traffic has stopped and the air goes clean and soft and every hard noise is gone. That is as near as I can get. Casper smelled it on me at the stables and stopped dead with a saddle in his hands and said, very quietly, "Oh, Jonas." "Don't. I'm not going to say anything. You're going to say be careful." "No," Casper said. "I was going to say I have never seen him look at anything like he looked at you in the courtyard yesterday, and it frightened me, and I have known him longer than you have." He put the saddle down. "That man does not have a low setting. If he loves you, he will love you at full power for the rest of his life, and he will get it wrong, and it will not be small when he does." The dowager sent for me not long after. She received me in a room with too much light, and did not offer me a chair. She is a small woman with a very straight back who has outlived 2 governments, and she looked at me for a while before she spoke. "You are the boy who sat under the piano," she said. "Yes, ma'am. He does not know how to have anything." She turned a ring on her finger. "He has only ever been permitted to hold things. When he was small, I took a dog away from him because it was going to die and I did not want him to watch. That was the last thing he asked me for. I did not know what to say to that. 'They will come for you,' she said. 'Not tomorrow. When it is useful.' And that was the whole conversation, and I was outside in the corridor within minutes. And I have never in my life felt so precisely and coldly warned. The last good night was in his rooms, in the rain again, because it rained for most of that autumn, and I have never been able to hear it since, without my chest going tight. He had been in the city all day at something dull and came back after dark and found me asleep in his chair with a book on my face. And I woke to him, crouched in front of me with his coat still on, just looking. "You are in my chair," he said. "It has no name on it." He kissed me before I finished the sentence. He had learned that too, by then. He had learned to take his time, which for a man like that is a discipline close to violence. And he did it with his hands first. One thumb under my chin, the whole of his palm against the side of my throat where the gland is, so that everything in me went loose and stupid at once. He got me out of the chair and into the room with my hands in his shirt and his mouth going down the side of my neck, and when he found the place under my ear he stopped there and stayed, and I heard the sound come out of my own mouth. "Say it," he said, against my skin. "Out loud. You told me I would not be able to see it. Don't stop. Louder. Nikolai." He got a fistful of the back of my shirt and lifted me half off the floor and put me against the door. And the rest of it is mine. But I will tell you that we did not get past his hands under my shirt and my leg hooked over his hip and his forehead pressed hard into my shoulder while he shook. I felt him shaking. The king of Verrin, who had never wanted anything in public in his life, holding onto a man in a dark room and shaking. "I want to bond you," he said, into my collarbone, ruined. "I am not asking. I am telling you where I am, because you told me I have to say things out loud." "Then ask me properly," I said. "When you're not in this state. That state is permanent now," he said. "You should know that. It is not going away." I put my hands in his hair and held his head against me and looked over his shoulder at the rain going down the black window. And I thought, with everything in me, that I had done it. 2 lives, and I had got it right on the second one. Days later he took my life apart with the very best intentions in the world. It started with something I said in bed, which is where all of it starts. We were lying in the dark and he had my hand up against his chest and was going over my knuckles with his thumb, and I said, without thinking about it at all, "If this ever goes badly, I'll go home for the winter. Shut myself in the provinces and eat my mother's soup and listen to my brother complain about the River Commission and let them all get bored of me." His thumb stopped. "Why would it go badly? It's a thing people say, Nikolai. It is not a thing you say," he said. "You do not say things you do not mean. That is the entire point of you. You have to stop saying that." He did not answer. He went back to my knuckles and I fell asleep with my face against his shoulder and I did not think about it again, which is the only part of the whole business I would take back. Days later, I came out of the long gallery and a man from the household was waiting for me with a folder. There is a small ceremony to being made anything at court, and I had been made something without attending it. The word they used was companion, which is an old rank nobody had filled in 3 reigns, and it came with a salary, a permanent seat on the household council, and rooms. Not my own rooms. Rooms on the king's floor, 2 floors up from the ones my family had held since before I was born. At the other end of his own corridor, with my things already in them, because somebody had gone in and packed my life into boxes while I was reading about birds. I stood in the corridor with the folder open and my ears ringing. There was more. My mother had been appointed to the dowager's household, an honor so large that she had already written to accept it before anybody thought to tell me. My brother, who had been applying to the River Commission since before I came back and had been turned down every year of it, had been given the post. And the family land, which my father's father had held outright and free of everybody, had been taken under the crown's patronage, which meant repairs, which meant money, which meant that every acre of the only place on earth that had ever been mine now belonged, in the way that matters, to the man I was sleeping with. I found him in the map room with his ministers. "Out," he said to them, when he saw my face, and they went, and he came round the table with something almost like hope on him, because he thought, I know he thought, that I had come to thank him. "Put it back," I said. "Put what back?" "All of it. Every piece." He stopped. "Jonas, my mother has a position she cannot refuse. My brother has a job he will never know he got on merit. My house is a project of yours." I put the folder down on the map table because my hands were not to be trusted. "And I have a rank, and a salary, and a seat, and rooms 12 doors from yours, and I did not agree to a single one of them. You would not have agreed. That's my right. It is not safe," he said, and his voice came up for the first time. You are unranked, and you are in my house, and everyone knows what you are to me now. And unranked people can be moved, Jonas. They can be sent for. They can be spoken to by a man on a council and given a train ticket and a reason, and I will not have that happen to you. So I made you impossible to move. He was breathing hard. I gave you a floor and a rank and an income, and I put your family somewhere that nobody can reach them. And if the entire council came for you tomorrow, they would have to come through the crown, and I would like you to explain to me what part of that is a crime. The part where you didn't ask. I have been asking you things for 2 months. You asked me what I read. You did not ask me whether I wanted my whole life moved into your building. I heard how loud I was and did not care. I told you one time in the dark that if it went badly I would go home. And 4 days later there is no home to go to that isn't yours. He went white. Say that again, he said. You heard it. You think I did it to trap you. No. And this is the thing that made it unbearable. I know you didn't. I know you did every single piece of it because you were frightened. That is exactly what makes it what it is. I was crying by then and furious about it. You were frightened, so you took the door off. That's what your father did with the boy in the kitchen, Nikolai. He was frightened, and he made a person disappear, and he told himself it was protection, and you have never forgiven him for it. And you have just done it to me in a nicer building. He did not shout. He did not move at all. I have been telling you no since the day I came back, I said. It is the only thing I have ever done for myself. And you loved it. You loved it so much that you have very carefully arranged a life in which I can never do it again. Because if I say no to you now, my mother loses her position, and my brother loses his commission, and the roof goes back to falling into the hall. That is not what would happen. It's what I'd have to weigh, I said. Every time. Forever, if you understand. You have made my yes worth nothing. The silence in that room went on a long time. I did not see it, he said, finally. No. You never do. I picked the folder up and set it in front of him, and it took everything I had to keep my hand flat on it. You told me I would have to say things out loud because you can't see them. I'm saying one now. I am not staying, Jonas. Put it all back. All of it. On the record, so that nobody can say I gave up something valuable, because I'm not going to be a story about a boy who was foolish. My voice went then, and then don't come after me. If you come after me, it's the same thing again. You have to let me be somewhere you're not. He stood in the middle of that room with all the maps of his country on the table behind him, and he said, How long? I don't know. Give me a number and I will keep it. I don't have one. He nodded. Once. Like a man taking an instruction, and turned away and put both hands on the table, and stayed like that with his head down. And I left him there, and that is the last thing I saw before the door. And I have to live with it. I went home. I renounced the rank in writing. On the way, at a post office in the town below the hill, and I have never enjoyed anything less. My mother met me on the drive and did not speak to me properly for over a week, because she had wanted that position her whole life, and had held it for a matter of days, and she told me I was a stupid boy who had confused pride with principle, and I let her, because from where she stood she was not entirely wrong. The house was cold. That is the honest texture of it. Everybody imagines exile as something with weather in it, and it is mostly cold rooms and small tasks, and the sound of your own shoes. The first week I did nothing at all. I slept badly, and got up late and walked to the end of the lane and back, and my scent went strange, which is what happens when you have been living inside somebody else's for months and then stop. It was not sickness. We were not bonded, and I had that to be grateful for and did not feel grateful. It was more like the flatness of a room after the music is turned off. I would catch the shape of him in a doorway out of the corner of my eye, over and over. The second week the papers came. There was no letter, only documents in a plain envelope from the office of the household. My mother's appointment reversed at her own request, which was a lie kindly told and which allowed her to keep her dignity, and which she never quite forgave me for either. The land taken back out of patronage and returned to us outright, with the repairs already done and no invoice, and a note in a clerk's hand explaining that the work could not be undone and that the Crown made no claim on it. My brother's commission left exactly where it was, with a letter from the head of the river board, unprompted, stating for the record that the appointment had been made on the strength of years of applications and would have been made anyway. He had gone and got that. He had asked a man to write down that my brother had earned something. There was no note from him. The third week, I started fixing the gate. Badly. Because it needed doing, and because my hands needed a job. A man from the village helped me and did not ask me anything about the palace, and I was more grateful to him than I knew how to say. The fourth week the letters began, one a day, and they were neither begging nor clever, which is how I knew he had thought about it. He wrote to me as he had never once spoken to me in all the years he had known me, in that flat, precise voice, about what he had done that day and what he had got wrong in it. He had said a cruel thing to the trade minister and enjoyed it, and had written to apologize, and expected the man would take it for politics. He had taken the loose step out of the east stair, which had been loose since we were boys, and he wrote that it should not have taken this to get it done. I had to put that one down and go and stand in the yard for a while. He did not know what he had written. He could not have known. He had walked past that step his entire life and had it pulled out because a man he had upset once mentioned that the house was neglected. And I stood in my mother's yard in the cold, with my hands over my mouth. He had found my book moved and had put it back crooked. In the last one, he wrote that Casper had told him he was doing all of it at me rather than for me, and that I would say the same thing, and that Casper was probably right, and that he was sending it anyway. I did not answer any of them. I read all of them, twice, sitting on the step outside the kitchen door with the envelope in my lap, and then I put them in the drawer with the string and the fuses. In the fifth week he stopped writing, and I found out what it actually costs to be the one who left, because I lay in that cold bed for 3 nights convinced I had finally managed to be too much for the only person who had ever noticed I was there. Then on the 6th week, I came round the corner of the house with an armful of wet kindling, and there was a car on the drive. One car and nothing else. No outriders and no second vehicle, and nobody with an earpiece pretending to look at a hedge. He was standing beside it in the rain, in a coat that was already ruined. And he did not come toward me, and he did not say my name. He said, "I am not here to take you back." I stood there with the wood soaking through my sleeve. "I am here because there is one sentence I owe you. And I would not say it in a letter, because you would read it in my handwriting, and I need you to see my face while I say it, and then I will go." Water was running off him. "May I say it? Say it." "I made your yes worth nothing," he said. "You told me that in the map room and I did not understand it for 11 days. I thought you were angry about the rooms." He had to stop, for a second. "You spent your life being agreeable so that you would be allowed to stay, and the first thing you ever did for yourself was refuse me, and it is the reason I love you, and I built a house around you where you could not do it anymore. I did not trap you by accident. I did it because I was afraid, and I dressed it as care. And it is the exact thing that was done to me. And I did not see it because I have never had to look at what I cost anybody." The kindling was going to pieces in my arms and I could not put it down. "That is the sentence," he said. "I am sorry for that. Not for the rank and not for the roof. For that. Nikolai. I am going now. Nikolai." He had his hand on the car door. "It's raining," I said. "Extensively." He turned round. We sat in the kitchen because it was the only warm room in the house. He took his coat off and hung it on the back of a chair like a man who had been in kitchens before, which he had not. And he sat down at a scrubbed table with a chip out of the corner and put his hands flat on it and waited, and I made tea badly and did not offer him any until it was too strong to drink. "There's something I have to tell you," I said. "You're going to think I've lost my mind. I need you to let me get to the end of it." "All right." So I told him. I told it plainly, in order, the way you would report an accident, the stairs and the coats and the party overhead, the years before that, the coffee and the shirts and the rain, the cathedral, and her name, which I said out loud in that kitchen for the only time in my life, the room I woke up in and the light through the window and the sound of the courtyard. I told him that I had known him since I was a child and that he had known me for a matter of weeks. He did not interrupt once. When I stopped, the kettle was making noises on the range and neither of us moved to it. "Say something," I said. "I am attempting to select," he said, "from a number of things." And his voice was not right. He looked down at his own hands on my mother's table. You died in my house. Yes. On the east stair. Yes. With her coats. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. In the map room, you said you had been telling me no since the day you came back. I took it to mean from the lake. Four-way. I know you did. I corrected you in my head, he said. I thought, he has got his months muddled. He got up and went to the window and stood with his back to me for a long time, and when he spoke again it was very quiet. I have been furious with a man for 2 months, he said, for laughing at you at a table. And you have been sitting there the entire time knowing that the same man is going to stand at my wedding, and that I am going to marry somebody I have never mentioned to you, and that you are going to fetch her coats for years, and then die alone 1 floor under my party. He put his hand against the glass. And you have still been coming into rooms and telling me to walk. It wasn't you, I said. That's what I've had to get through. It was you, and it wasn't. End quote. He never did any of it. Not yet. And you're standing in my mother's kitchen with the rain coming off you, so do not do that. Do what? Do not let me off. He turned round. I did it. Some version of me did every hour of it. And it was not an accident of circumstance. It was who I was, and the only reason he is not standing here instead of me is that you came back and were rude to me in a corridor. He said it with a kind of horror. That is the whole of it, Jonas. That is the entire difference between the man who let you die on a stair and the man in this room. You told me to move. You could have asked me a question, I said. Any time. In all those years. Yes. 1 question. Yes. He came and stood on the other side of that table and did not touch me. What do you want? He said. That is the question. I have never asked anybody it in my life, and I do not know what happens after it. Nobody had ever asked me, not in either life. I sat there with my hands round a cup of tea. I had made 2 strong, and I found that I had an answer ready, and that it had been ready for a very long time. I want to be asked, I said. Not protected. Asked. Every single time, even when it's slower, even when you're frightened, even when you already know the answer. And when I say no, I want it to cost me nothing. I made myself look at him. That's all. That's the whole list. That is not a very large thing to want. It's an enormous thing to want, I said. You've just never had to give it to anybody. He nodded slowly. Then he pulled out the chair opposite and sat back down in my mother's kitchen, in a ruined coat, with his elbows on the table. Then I am going to ask you something, he said. And I want you to know before you answer that I have already had it drafted, and that if you say no, it will be burned and never mentioned again, and that nothing else in your life changes either way. Your brother keeps his post. Your mother may have her position back tomorrow if she wants it. On her own account, and not on yours. Your land is yours, and has been since the 2nd week. Ask. I am going to tell the household council what you are to me, he said. In the room. On the record. With every one of them watching, so that it is a fact and not a rumor, because a rumor is what they can price. He was holding the edge of the table. It is the single most dangerous thing I can do, and I have wanted to do it since the boathouse. But it makes you visible, permanently. And you told me on that stair that visible is what you wanted, and I am not going to decide it for you again. The rain was coming down the window behind him. May I? He said. I said yes. He did it the following week, standing at the head of a table in a room I was not in, because I chose not to be, and I would not change it. Casper told me about it afterward with his hat in his hands like a man reporting from a battle. Nikolai had let them get through the estimates, and then he had said, in the flattest voice in the kingdom, that the household should know that he intended to bond Jonas of the provinces, that Jonas had refused him more than once already and would very likely do it again, and that any man in the room who thought there was leverage in that should test it early, because he would only be patient about it once. Then he sat down and asked for the next item. One of them did test it. That first winter, through a friend of my mother's and a question about the land. It was dealt with in a morning, and I only heard about it years afterward, from Casper, who cannot keep anything. Nobody breathed for about a minute, Casper said. And then old Hallam asked about the road budget. And that was that. He laughed and rubbed his face. You should have seen him. He was terrified. I have known him since we were boys, and I have never seen his hands do that. The dowager sent for me again, that same week, and this time there was a chair. You gave it all back, she said. Yes, ma'am. She looked at me for a while with her rings turning. Nobody has ever given him anything back, she said. Sit down before you fall over. His rut came at the end of the winter, and I would like to say that we were sensible about it, and I will not, because that is not what happened. He went into the North Tower rooms and had the door shut, which is what he had done every time since he was 17, alone, because you do not put an unbonded omega near an alpha in that state unless you have already decided something. He had asked me nothing. He had simply gone, and left a note that said, in its entirety, I have gone up. Do not come. I will be reasonable again on Thursday. I stood in the corridor with that note in my hand, and I laughed until I had to sit down, and then I went to find the household doctor and asked him what I needed to know, and then I went up and knocked on the door of the North Tower rooms. Go away. Ask me, I said, through the door. Nothing for a long moment. Jonas, you said you'd ask me every time, even when you already know the answer, even when you're frightened. My hand was flat on the wood. So ask. The door opened. He was ruined. I have seen him hung over, wounded, sleepless, and shouted at by 3 governments, and I had never seen him look like that, half-dressed and shaking and holding onto the frame with his eyes shut because he could not do it and look at me at the same time. Will you stay? He said. I said yes. I am not going to tell you about those days. Some things belong to the people who were there. He asked me 4 separate times, at 4 different hours, in that scraped voice, and the 4th time I put my hands either side of his face and told him that if he asked once more I would go downstairs and get a horse and leave. The fever in him broke on the 2nd night. He slept with his head on my chest and his fist closed in the front of my shirt like a child. And I lay there awake in the dark listening to a king breathe. And I will tell you that when he set his mouth against the gland at the side of my throat, he stopped and waited with his lips against my skin until I said it out loud, because I had told him he would not be able to see it, and he had learned. It hurt. Nobody says that. It hurt, and then something opened up behind my ribs that has never closed since, and I have not been alone inside my own head for a single hour since. Afterward, when he could speak, he said, You will notice that I have not asked you to marry me. I had noticed. That will be a state matter, and there will be a committee, and it will take a year, and I intend to make all of them ask you individually. He said, into my shoulder. Every single one of them, in a room, out loud. That was the winter. Everything after it is the ordinary part, which is the part I would not trade. Anton's family got their business back in the spring, on review, which was the correct outcome, and which Nikolai signed without comment. Anton himself has not been in the building since. I asked once whether that had been my doing, and he said no. It had been Anton's. And then he changed the subject in that flat way he has when he thinks he has already answered a thing. He is not a good man now. He is a better one, which I have come to think is the only honest thing available to anybody. He is still rude to ministers, and he still says the true sentence at the wrong moment. And he has learned to apologize, badly, at length, in writing, usually days late. He asks me things constantly, and he is still bad at it, and the badness has become one of my favorite things in the world, and he did not get bored. That was my private fear for the first year, the one I never said out loud, that I was novelty, and that novelty ends. What actually happened is that he got worse. He is worse now than he was in the storm. He is a man who spent his entire life being wanted by people who wanted the office, and he came very late and all at once to being loved by somebody who had already had the whole of him, at his coldest, and walked away. The committee took longer than a year, and every man on it asked me the question in person, in a room, out loud, because he had said they would, and he does not say things he does not mean. We married in the spring after that. I live on his floor now, which I chose, and my old rooms are my brother's when he is in the capital, and my mother has the position back and holds it on her own account and mentions this at every opportunity. A month ago I could not sleep, and I went down to the east stair. He took the 3rd step out before he knew what it had done to me. which is a thing I have never got to the bottom of and have stopped trying to. There's a new one there now. Plain wood, a different color from the rest, and it will never match. And I have asked him twice to have it stained, and he has refused both times. I was sitting on it in the dark in my coat when the door at the top opened, and the light came down, and there he was in white tie, having left something enormous full of ambassadors. "What are you doing?" he said. Sitting on a step, he looked at me for a moment. He did not ask why. That night. And he did not tell me to come up, and he did not send anybody for a chair. He came down and sat on the step next to me in a suit that cost more than the gate I fixed, and put his shoulder against my shoulder, and stayed there, and after a while he took my hand and turned it over and started going across my knuckles with his thumb. "How long are we sitting here?" he said. "I don't know yet." "All right," he said. The end. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the story, tell me your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you.